Laura Bennett stepped gracefully onto the Skyline Airways flight from Miami to Washington, D.C., gently holding her 7-year-old daughter Emily's hand. As soon as the pair entered the cabin, they immediately drew the attention of nearby passengers. Laura exuded a refined elegance, evident in her every movement, from the confident manner she carried herself to the gentle sweep of her hand as she softly brushed her wavy dark hair away from her face. She moved with effortless sophistication, revealing an inner strength and quiet dignity that captivated those around her. At her side, Emily walked cheerfully, clutching a small gray stuffed bunny affectionately named Fluffy. Dressed in a bright yellow dress that shimmered like sunshine, Emily looked around curiously, her innocent smile illuminating her young, radiant face. The passengers nearby glanced warmly toward Emily, charmed by her excitement and innocence. Suddenly, as Emily took another excited step forward, Fluffy slipped from her grip, tumbling onto the aisle floor beneath another passenger's seat. Emily froze instantly, eyes wide with worry. "Mommy, Fluffy fell," she cried out softly, looking around nervously. Laura gently reassured her daughter with a comforting smile, ready to retrieve the beloved toy herself. But before she could react, a kind, elderly gentleman seated nearby leaned down, carefully retrieved Fluffy, and handed it back to Emily with a warm smile. "Here you are, sweetheart," he said kindly. "Thank you so much, sir," Emily replied with sincere gratitude, her voice sweet and earnest. Witnessing this touching scene, several passengers around them smiled approvingly, immediately feeling a quiet fondness for the mother and daughter who had brightened the cabin with their warmth and grace. Laura guided Emily toward their seats, row 14 near the window. Emily's eyes sparkled excitedly. "Mommy, can I sit by the window?" she asked eagerly. "I want to see the clouds." "Of course, my dear. I specifically chose these seats for you," Laura replied softly, gently settling Emily into her seat. Just as the two began to get comfortable, another family approached from the front of the plane. It was the Kensington family, who had been seated initially in first class but seemed displeased with something. Thomas Kensington, an influential physician known for his wealth and powerful connections, led the way, his expression stern and authoritative. As the Kensington boy passed by Emily, he abruptly halted and frowned noticeably, pointing rudely toward her. "Mom, I don't want to sit anywhere near that girl," he complained audibly, a tone of disdain apparent in his young voice. The atmosphere in the cabin suddenly grew tense. Passengers turned their heads, aware that something inappropriate had just occurred, yet unsure how to react. Laura gently placed her hand protectively on Emily's shoulder, feeling a surge of discomfort at the open display of discrimination from the young boy. Mrs. Kensington, rather than correcting her son's behavior, merely glanced toward the flight attendants, silently demanding immediate resolution. Alyssa, a young flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair, quickly approached the Kensingtons, offering them an apologetic and reassuring smile. Leaning forward discreetly, Alyssa whispered to Mrs. Kensington in clear sympathy, "I understand completely, Mrs. Kensington. Please allow me just a moment. I'll take care of this immediately." Straightening, Alyssa quickly turned toward Laura and Emily, her previously cheerful demeanor replaced by a cold, professional smile. She approached their row and addressed Laura curtly, her voice taking on an icy, detached quality. "Excuse me, ma'am, we need you and your daughter to move to row 27 at the back of the plane. The Kensington family requires these seats." Laura glanced behind her, immediately recognizing the discomfort and inconvenience of the suggested seats. Close to the restroom, cramped and lacking the comfort and privacy of their original choice. She looked calmly at Alyssa, maintaining her composure, and politely replied, "We reserved these seats quite some time ago. Surely there's another way to accommodate their needs?" Alyssa's polite smile quickly faded, replaced with a clear look of irritation. Her tone grew increasingly insistent, almost aggressive. "I'm sorry, but this request is not optional. The airline requires you to move immediately." Laura felt a sudden surge of frustration, recognizing the subtle yet undeniable prejudice driving this uncomfortable encounter. Passengers around them became increasingly attentive, sensing the injustice unfolding before their eyes. Emily, acutely aware of the growing tension, held Fluffy tighter and stared anxiously at her mother, confusion and fear beginning to cloud her eyes. The Kensington family watched silently from a short distance away, their expressions showing no remorse, only mild impatience. Thomas Kensington, authoritative and intimidating, observed Laura's hesitation with evident displeasure. Before Laura could respond further, Alyssa leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice in an attempt at discretion, yet still loud enough for others nearby to hear. Mrs. Kensington's son has health concerns that necessitate proximity to this section. I hope you'll be cooperative and understanding. Laura, fully aware of the underlying implication, felt a sharp pang of anger at the thinly veiled bias being directed at her and her daughter. She glanced down at Emily, noticing tears forming quietly in the corners of her daughter's eyes, an innocent child being forced to confront unfairness she couldn't fully grasp. The injustice of the situation was undeniable and unacceptable. Taking a deep breath, Laura steadied her voice, maintaining the dignity and strength she always carried herself with, even in the face of adversity. My daughter and I are passengers just like anyone else on this flight. Our reservation was confirmed weeks in advance. If there is a seating issue, it must be resolved without forcing us to sacrifice our rights. Lisa stepped back slightly, startled and irritated by Laura's composed yet firm resistance. Around them, murmurs of curiosity and discomfort began to ripple through the cabin, passengers whispering quietly, sensing the growing confrontation. Laura remained standing protectively near Emily, determined not to yield to the mounting pressure from Elisa or the impatient gazes of the Kensington family. As tension continued to escalate, Laura silently prepared herself for a confrontation she never wished to have, yet one she was unwilling to back away from. She glanced around briefly, sensing the supportive gazes of certain passengers who sympathized with her situation, as well as those who simply observed with curiosity. Deep down, Laura understood that this was more than a disagreement over seats. This was a critical moment about fairness, respect, and dignity. Holding Emily's small hand reassuringly, Laura faced Alyssa firmly, ready to stand up against the injustice that had unexpectedly surfaced on this seemingly ordinary flight, determined to set an example of strength and fairness for her daughter, and for every passenger, silently witnessing this unfolding conflict. Laura stood calmly, firmly holding Emily's hand as Elisa, visibly agitated, continued to insist. The flight attendant, maintaining an artificial air of politeness, leaned forward again, though now her voice held an edge of authority, tinged with impatience. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but the Kensington's son genuinely has a health condition that requires proximity to this area. I'm afraid this isn't negotiable. We simply must ask you to cooperate. Laura gazed directly into Elisa's eyes, her own unwavering, clearly conveying her quiet determination. She spoke softly yet firmly, her words precise, measured, and unmistakably resolute. Ms. Alyssa, I appreciate the need for compassion when it comes to health conditions, but are you absolutely certain this is truly about a health condition? Or is it because they believe my daughter and I aren't important enough to occupy these seats? Laura's words resonated sharply throughout the cabin. Nearby passengers noticeably tensed, their whispers growing louder. Elisa's carefully managed expression faltered, revealing momentary discomfort before she forced another polite smile. Please, Mrs. Bennet, Elisa said more sternly now, her voice louder, echoing clearly in the quiet cabin. This request comes directly from the crew, and your cooperation is required. If you refuse, we will be forced to delay departure further. Emily's hand tightened nervously around Laura's fingers. The child, sensing the growing confrontation, clutched her beloved stuffed bunny, Fluffy, even more tightly, eyes wide with confusion and anxiety. Laura noticed the change immediately, feeling a surge of protective anger at the unfair situation. I booked these seats well in advance precisely so my daughter could enjoy this flight comfortably, Laura replied calmly yet strongly. I'm sorry, but we will not move simply because someone else believes we don't deserve our seats. By now, the entire cabin was openly watching the interaction unfold. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly understanding the subtle yet undeniable discrimination playing out before them. Thomas Kensington, standing nearby, stepped forward, clearly intending to assert his influence and authority. His voice, polite yet filled with underlying power, resonated through the quiet tension. Mrs. Bennet, perhaps you misunderstood the situation. My son has special health concerns. We have always received appropriate accommodations from Skyline Airways in the past. Your resistance is causing an unnecessary inconvenience for all passengers. Laura turned her gaze directly toward Thomas Kensington. Her voice, though polite, held an unmistakable edge of steel. Dr. Kensington, let me be perfectly clear. I deeply sympathize with any genuine medical concern your son may have. However, I find it quite unusual that a health issue requiring proximity to these particular seats wasn't resolved prior to boarding. I believe there may be other options available to accommodate your family without compromising ours. Her pointed words landed like stones dropped into still water, rippling out in waves of murmurs and whispers. Kensington visibly bristled, clearly unused to such direct opposition, especially from someone he'd considered insignificant. Sensing that Alyssa was faltering, a senior flight attendant, Cynthia, briskly approached from the front of the cabin. Cynthia's authoritative presence and stern demeanor were apparent from the moment she arrived. Immediately assessing the scene, she addressed Laura sharply, her tone unmistakably severe. "Excuse me, ma'am. I understand there's a dispute here. Please be aware that if you continue refusing to comply with crew directives, the airline will take this matter very seriously." Laura stood firm, meeting Cynthia's gaze evenly, feeling the immense weight of the moment. She understood fully the implication of Cynthia's words, that she and Emily might be forcibly removed from the flight, accused of causing a disruption simply by defending their rights. Gathering her composure once again, Laura replied, calm but determined, addressing Cynthia directly in a voice that everyone nearby could clearly hear. "This isn't a dispute. It's an attempt to force us into a situation of unjustifiable discomfort simply because another passenger doesn't wish to sit near us. If you truly respect every passenger equally, you'd recognize immediately how inappropriate your request is." Cynthia's expression hardened further, clearly unhappy at being publicly challenged. Her response came swiftly, carrying a clear sense of finality. "Mrs. Bennet, we are simply trying to accommodate another passenger's medical needs. It's nothing personal. Please cooperate, or we will be forced to escalate this issue." Laura paused momentarily, her eyes briefly resting on Emily. Her daughter, now visibly upset, quietly whispered, voice trembling slightly with uncertainty, "Mommy, why won't they let us stay in our seats? Did we do something wrong?" Laura gently knelt down to Emily's level, softly touching her daughter's cheek. In that quiet moment of tenderness amidst the storm, she reassured Emily with unwavering confidence. "No, sweetheart, we've done absolutely nothing wrong. Sometimes people think they can treat others unfairly, but we must always stand strong and let them know it isn't right." Emily nodded slowly, understanding her mother's words more deeply than a child of her age should ever need to. Laura rose again, facing Cynthia and Alyssa with renewed resolve, feeling a surge of clarity and strength. "I will ask again very clearly," Laura announced calmly but firmly. "Is this truly about medical needs, or is it about a family who believes their status entitles them to displace others without consideration or consequence?" The cabin fell silent once more, everyone awaiting Cynthia's response. Alyssa shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Laura's gaze, clearly unsettled by the starkness of her pointed accusation. Cynthia paused briefly, her authoritative demeanor shaken slightly by Laura's unexpected strength and eloquence. "Mrs. Bennet, your accusations are serious," Cynthia finally responded, attempting to regain control. "This airline treats all passengers fairly and equally." Laura interjected decisively, cutting her off mid-sentence. "If that were truly the case, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Her words rang clearly, powerfully, challenging everyone in the cabin, including Cynthia and Alyssa, to reconsider the hidden biases behind this seemingly innocent request. The tension in the cabin intensified further, passengers shifting nervously in their seats, quietly whispering their discomfort and shock at what was clearly unfolding before them. Laura, understanding that this confrontation had now become about more than just her and Emily, stood resolutely, prepared to continue standing her ground. She realized this was no longer merely a disagreement about seats or accommodations. It was a battle for dignity, fairness, and basic human respect. For Emily's sake, and for the countless others who faced similar injustices in silence, Laura Bennet was determined not to yield. At precisely that moment, sensing that the situation was escalating beyond Elisa's control, Cynthia, the senior flight attendant, strode purposefully down the aisle toward Laura and Emily. Her approach radiated authority and impatience. Passengers instinctively shrank back into their seats as she passed, recognizing that this was no longer just an ordinary conflict over seats. It had become something deeper and more unsettling. "Excuse me, Mrs. Bennet," Cynthia's voice cut sharply through the tension-filled air, her tone clearly communicating that she had no intention of negotiation. "I understand there's a disagreement here, but let me make something explicitly clear. You must comply with crew instructions. We need you and your daughter to move immediately." Laura turned toward Cynthia, unflinching. Her posture remained composed, though inside, her heart began to race. She knew the gravity of this moment. Not only was her dignity at stake, but also the fundamental values of respect and equality she'd always instilled in Emily. "I'm afraid I must respectfully decline," Laura replied clearly, her voice steady despite the pressure. "We have reserved these seats well in advance. Asking us to move simply to accommodate another passenger who arrived later without genuine justification is both unfair and unjustifiable." Cynthia's eyes narrowed slightly, the veneer of patience rapidly slipping away. She exhaled sharply, as though Laura's determination personally offended her sense of control. "Mrs. Bennet, perhaps you misunderstand," Cynthia stated emphatically, loud enough now for nearby passengers to clearly hear. "This isn't a negotiation, this is an airline directive. Your refusal to comply will force us to remove you from this flight entirely." At these words, Emily's small frame visibly trembled. The young girl, overwhelmed by the mounting tension and harsh voices, began to cry quietly. Tears streamed silently down her delicate cheeks as she hugged her stuffed bunny Fluffy, tighter than ever, seeking some comfort amid the confusion and hostility around her. Laura immediately knelt beside her daughter, shielding her from the harsh stares of Cynthia and the Kensington family. "It's all right, sweetheart," Laura whispered gently, brushing tears softly from Emily's cheeks. "You haven't done anything wrong, my love. Be brave for just a moment longer. Everything will be okay, I promise." Witnessing Emily's emotional distress, some of the passengers around them exchanged uncomfortable glances, their faces clearly registering growing unease. The quiet sobbing of the innocent little girl resonated deeply, igniting silent feelings of empathy and indignation among the cabin's occupants. Thomas Kensington, however, seemed unfazed by Emily's tears. Deciding to assert his influence directly, he stepped forward with deliberate confidence. His presence was commanding, his voice polite yet chillingly authoritative. "Mrs. Bennet, allow me to interject," Kensington began, his words carefully measured and deliberately audible to everyone around. "My family and I have a very close relationship with Skyline Airways. We have frequently traveled with this airline, and arrangements like these have never been a problem before. Surely you can understand why the crew might consider our request more than reasonable." Laura stood again, positioning herself protectively in front of Emily, now determined not to show even the slightest sign of weakness or uncertainty. Her eyes met Kensington's directly, unwavering, defiant in the face of his implied power. "Mr. Kensington, with all due respect, your relationship with this airline should not grant you the privilege of displacing other passengers at your convenience," Laura responded pointedly. "Respectfully, I suggest that the airline reconsider whether preferential treatment aligns with their commitment to customer equality." Kensington's expression hardened, clearly displeased with Laura's unexpected courage and resistance. Around them, passengers openly murmured their agreement, now fully engaged and invested in the outcome. The murmurs were becoming louder, their tones shifting from confusion to quiet outrage as they processed the blatant injustice taking place right before them. Cynthia, sensing the growing shift in passenger sentiment yet unwilling to lose control, intervened once again, her voice now sharper and more forceful. "Enough!" she snapped, cutting through the murmurs. "This isn't a public debate, Mrs. Bennet. Your refusal to cooperate is disrupting the flight. Either you comply immediately or we'll have security remove you and your daughter." Laura felt a surge of anger rise sharply within her chest, yet she tempered her response carefully. She knew that how she handled this moment would leave a lasting impression on Emily, as well as on all those silently watching and judging the situation. If ensuring fairness and dignity is considered disruptive, then perhaps this airline needs to reconsider its policies, Laura responded with cool resolve. "I am not trying to create a disturbance. I'm only trying to uphold basic fairness for myself and my child." Emily's soft crying had slowly subsided into quiet sniffles, yet her fear remained painfully evident. The small child looked pleadingly up at her mother, her innocent eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "Mommy," Emily's voice quavered, heartbreakingly fragile. "Why don't they want us to stay here? Did we make someone angry?" Laura felt her heart breaking, hearing the vulnerability in her daughter's innocent voice. She gently stroked Emily's hair, her resolve growing stronger than ever. "No, sweetheart," she whispered gently, yet loud enough for Cynthia and Kensington to clearly hear. "You have done absolutely nothing wrong. This isn't your fault. Some people simply don't understand that everyone deserves equal respect, no matter who they are." Her words, though quietly spoken to Emily, echoed clearly throughout the cabin, sharply reminding every passenger witnessing the scene of the true stakes of the unfolding conflict. Several passengers openly nodded, quietly voicing support. Whispers of "she's right" and "this isn't fair" could now be clearly heard among the growing chorus of murmurs. Others stared accusingly at Kensington and Cynthia, silently judging their blatant misuse of power. Laura straightened her posture again, looking directly at Cynthia, her voice strong and unmistakably clear. "This flight has not yet left the gate," Laura declared steadily. "If you truly believe forcing my daughter and me out of our reserved seats is the appropriate decision, then you'll need to explain clearly to everyone on board exactly why. Is it really about health? Or has this always been about someone feeling entitled to special privileges?" Her statement landed powerfully, challenging Cynthia and Kensington directly in front of all the passengers, effectively forcing them to confront openly the injustice they were perpetuating. Cynthia stood motionless, momentarily stunned by Laura's assertiveness and the sudden wave of passenger support turning against her. Kensington, clearly frustrated and humiliated by the unexpected backlash, took a cautious step back, realizing that his attempt to assert power publicly was rapidly backfiring. The tense silence that followed Laura's challenge was deafening. Passengers sat frozen in anticipation, watching intently, sensing that the very core principles of fairness and human dignity hung precariously in the balance. Laura, unwavering and courageous, stood her ground, waiting calmly, determined to see justice upheld for herself, for Emily, and for everyone watching in quiet solidarity. The heavy silence inside the aircraft lingered, thick with anticipation. Cynthia stood momentarily speechless, confronted directly by Laura's resolute challenge. Thomas Kensington stepped back slightly, shifting uneasily as the confidence he'd displayed just moments earlier rapidly dissolved under the scrutiny of the entire cabin. Laura Bennett, sensing that this was the critical moment, a moment of truth she had never sought but now fully embraced, slowly rose to her full height, her poise unwavering. She looked directly into Cynthia's startled eyes, speaking clearly, deliberately, and with unwavering confidence. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," she began firmly, her voice resounding clearly throughout the silent cabin. "My name is Laura Bennett. My husband is Christopher Bennett, the Executive Director of the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States. If necessary, I am certain that he would take a keen personal interest in today's incident aboard this flight." Her words struck the cabin like lightning, sending a collective jolt through passengers and crew alike. The tension in the air, already palpable, intensified dramatically. Passengers around them immediately exchanged astonished glances, quickly whispering among themselves, the significance of her statement fully registering in their minds. Cynthia's face turned pale in an instant, her previously commanding demeanor utterly shattered. Her eyes widened with panic as the implication of Laura's statement sank in. Beside her, Alyssa's mouth fell open slightly, color draining swiftly from her face as she desperately glanced towards Cynthia for guidance, only to find the senior attendant equally frozen and incapable of responding. Thomas Kensington's confident posture visibly collapsed. He took another involuntary step backward, clearly shaken. His previously arrogant expression morphed into one of apprehension and concern, realizing instantly the gravity of what he had just provoked. His eyes darted anxiously around the cabin, desperate for any support but finding none. Laura stood firm, her expression calm and unflinching, despite the intensity of the moment. Emily, now quiet, gazed up at her mother in awe, sensing the strength and resolve radiating from her. Suddenly, before Cynthia could even attempt a response, the intercom handset at the attendant station buzzed sharply. Every eye immediately turned toward it, the shrill ring sounding unusually loud in the heavy silence. Cynthia, still visibly shaken, hurriedly stepped to the intercom, her trembling hands reaching hesitantly to answer. "Yes, Captain Mitchell," Cynthia responded, her voice barely above a whisper, yet audible enough that the surrounding passengers could hear the conversation unfolding. Her expression shifted dramatically as she listened intently to the words coming from the cockpit. Captain Andrew Mitchell's voice came through sternly, clear enough for Cynthia's ears alone, yet his tone was unmistakably firm. "Cynthia, we've just been made aware of the identity of Mrs. Bennett. Under no circumstances can we afford any conflict or further mishandling of this situation. I expect an immediate apology to Mrs. Bennett and her daughter, along with appropriate accommodations for them. Resolve this matter swiftly before we depart." Cynthia's already pale face turned nearly ghost white. She swallowed hard, visibly shaken, and quickly acknowledged the instructions. "Yes, Captain, understood clearly. I'll resolve it right away." Gently placing the handset back down, Cynthia turned slowly back toward Laura, visibly struggling to regain even a fragment of her previous composure. Alyssa stood nearby, eyes wide with disbelief, clearly understanding now the gravity of their mistake. "Mrs. Bennett," Cynthia finally spoke, her voice profoundly changed, soft, respectful, and contrite. "I sincerely apologize for this entire incident. On behalf of Skyline Airways, please accept my deepest apologies for the misunderstanding and the distress we have caused you and your daughter." Laura watched Cynthia carefully, her expression unwavering. Passengers around them sat in stunned silence, waiting with bated breath for her response, fully aware they had just witnessed an extraordinary reversal of fortune. one that revealed a deeply uncomfortable truth about power, privilege, and fairness. Cynthia continued cautiously, her voice shaking slightly under the scrutiny of so many watchful eyes, now acutely aware that any misstep could be catastrophic. "We will ensure immediately that your original seating arrangement remains intact. You and Emily have every right to remain exactly where you are. We also understand and deeply regret that you felt disrespected or singled out. Please accept our sincere apologies." Laura nodded slowly, taking a deep breath, carefully considering her next words. She felt no satisfaction from Cynthia's apology itself, but was deeply relieved to see justice prevail, not only for herself and Emily, but for the broader principle at stake. Her voice, calm and measured, broke through the lingering tension once again. "Thank you for acknowledging the mistake, Cynthia. However, it's essential that this is not merely a personal apology, but a genuine recognition that all passengers, regardless of perceived status or relationships, deserve equal dignity and respect. I hope today serves as an important lesson." Laura's words echoed powerfully through the cabin, eliciting quiet nods of agreement and relief from many surrounding passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation unfold. Emily, still gripping Fluffy tightly, looked up at her mother with a newfound admiration, sensing, even at her young age, that something profoundly meaningful had taken place. Thomas Kensington remained quietly to the side, visibly deflated and acutely aware of the stares from the passengers around him. He had no choice but to stand silently, humiliated by the public exposure of his arrogance and entitlement. His attempt at intimidation had disastrously backfired, leaving him humbled and exposed. Cynthia, visibly shaken but professionally composed once more, addressed the entire cabin clearly and respectfully. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize deeply for this delay and any discomfort caused by the incident that has occurred. Thank you sincerely for your patience and understanding. We will now proceed with the final preparations for departure and strive to ensure everyone has a comfortable and respectful journey." Quietly, Cynthia nodded respectfully to Laura and Emily once more, this time with genuine sincerity. Elisa quickly followed suit, offering a remorseful glance before retreating hurriedly down the aisle, clearly eager to escape the weight of her embarrassment and reflect privately on the lesson learned. Laura gently sat back down beside Emily, softly pulling her daughter close, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Emily, calmer now, whispered softly to her mother, her voice filled with quiet admiration and curiosity. "Mommy, does this mean nobody can treat anyone unfairly now?" Laura smiled warmly, gently stroking Emily's hair, understanding deeply how much this experience had impacted them both. "It means we have to always stand strong, sweetheart. Sometimes standing up for what's right means reminding everyone, even the powerful, that fairness matters." The cabin slowly returned to a state of quiet normalcy, passengers settling back into their seats, but the feeling that something important had been revealed lingered clearly in the air. The powerful had learned humility, the unjust had been corrected, and an essential lesson had been profoundly reinforced. Dignity, equality, and respect must always prevail, especially when they are challenged most strongly. Just as the tension finally seemed to be subsiding and the murmurs of support began fading into gentle whispers, a clear, authoritative voice rang out from the front of the cabin, grabbing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Andrew Mitchell speaking," he announced firmly. "I realize we have not yet departed due to a serious situation that has occurred on board. Given the nature and gravity of what has happened, I feel it's essential that I personally address the matter directly." At the sound of his voice, everyone immediately turned toward the front, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the cockpit doorway. Moments later, Captain Mitchell himself stepped out of the cockpit, his tall frame and commanding presence immediately visible to every passenger aboard. His dark blue uniform and gold-striped sleeves reinforced the seriousness of the moment, adding further weight to the significance of his intervention. Captain Mitchell moved purposefully down the aisle, pausing briefly as he approached the area where Laura and Emily were seated. Cynthia and Elisa stood stiffly to the side, clearly nervous about the captain's direct involvement and uncertain of what was about to happen next. The captain paused momentarily, offering a respectful nod toward Laura. His eyes, steady and sincere, conveyed a deep acknowledgement of the courage and composure she had demonstrated throughout the entire incident. Then, facing the entire cabin, Captain Mitchell cleared his throat slightly, ensuring he had the full attention of everyone present. "Passengers," he began clearly, his voice authoritative yet carrying a strong sense of integrity and reassurance. "First, on behalf of Skyline Airways, allow me to extend my sincere apologies to Mrs. Laura Bennett and her daughter Emily. What happened on board today is not only deeply regrettable, but entirely unacceptable." A heavy silence filled the cabin as passengers sat captivated, hanging on every word. Laura listened quietly, deeply appreciating the captain's public acknowledgement and his willingness to openly confront the injustice that had occurred. Captain Mitchell turned deliberately towards Cynthia and Elisa, his demeanor shifting from apology to stern reprimand. He addressed the two flight attendants directly and openly in front of all the passengers, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of their actions. "Cynthia, Elisa," the captain stated firmly, looking each woman squarely in the eyes, "your conduct today has directly violated Skyline Airways' core values and policies. Let me be abundantly clear. Our airline categorically rejects any form of discrimination or unfair treatment of our passengers. Our foremost duty is to ensure that every passenger, without exception, is treated with respect, dignity, and absolute fairness." Cynthia visibly paled, her expression shifting to one of embarrassment and remorse. Elisa dropped her eyes to the floor, clearly humbled and deeply aware of the weight of their errors now publicly exposed. Passengers watched closely, recognizing that this public reprimand was not simply symbolic, but a necessary moment of accountability and justice. Captain Mitchell continued, his voice measured but firm, ensuring every word resonated deeply with all aboard. "As the captain responsible for this aircraft and all on board, I must assure everyone that such behavior will never be tolerated. Skyline Airways will launch an immediate, thorough investigation into today's events, and I can guarantee appropriate and serious disciplinary measures will be taken against any crew member responsible. We will not overlook nor minimize the gravity of what happened today." A collective murmur of approval and relief spread throughout the cabin, passengers nodding quietly to one another, visibly reassured by the captain's decisive response and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Captain Mitchell then turned once more directly to Laura, softening his expression slightly, his voice returning to a warmer, more empathetic tone. "Mrs. Bennett, again, on behalf of myself and the airline, please accept my personal apologies for today's incident. Your courage and strength in standing firm against injustice has been deeply commendable. Your voice today has served as a necessary reminder to us all about the fundamental importance of fairness and dignity." Laura quietly nodded her appreciation, touched by the sincerity and gravity of Captain Mitchell's words. Emily watched the captain with wide eyes, now fully aware that something truly significant had occurred. Something important enough to bring the captain himself out of the cockpit. Mitchell turned again to address the entire cabin, his voice firm yet calm, delivering a message intended to leave no uncertainty regarding Skyline Airways' stance. "To all passengers aboard this flight," he concluded solemnly, "please understand clearly that Skyline Airways will always prioritize fairness, respect, and equality. We are not perfect, but when mistakes are made, we must learn from them decisively and publicly. Let today's incident remind us all that every passenger aboard every flight deserves nothing less than absolute respect." A brief pause followed his final words, the weight of the captain's statement settling deeply into the hearts and minds of everyone on board. Passengers began quietly applauding once more. This time, not just for Laura, but also in recognition of Captain Mitchell's clear, decisive, and courageous stand against injustice and discrimination. Feeling the moment's significance deeply, Laura gently squeezed Emily's hand, softly whispering to her daughter, "Do you see, sweetheart? Even when unfair things happen, standing strong helps make sure it never happens again." Emily smiled softly, her young heart lifted by her mother's reassuring words and the captain's strong statement of fairness. "Mommy, he's like you. He's brave too," Emily whispered quietly. Captain Mitchell offered one final respectful nod toward Laura and Emily before turning and walking purposefully back toward the cockpit. As he passed by Cynthia and Alyssa, he briefly paused, lowering his voice yet still audibly firm to both attendants. "Once we arrive at our destination, report directly to my office. We'll discuss next steps regarding your conduct then," he stated decisively, before continuing forward, his instructions leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the consequences awaiting them. Cynthia and Alyssa quietly withdrew, humbled and chastened, each retreating quickly toward their assigned stations, clearly eager to move past their embarrassment, though fully aware that accountability and reflection lay immediately ahead. The cabin crew returned swiftly to their duties, preparing once more for departure, this time in solemn, thoughtful silence. Passengers settled quietly back into their seats, their spirits visibly lighter and reassured. The moment had passed, but its lessons remained deeply etched in everyone's minds. As the aircraft finally prepared to depart, Laura gazed thoughtfully out the window, reflecting deeply upon the day's events. Emily nestled comfortably against her shoulder, content once again, sensing clearly that justice and fairness had ultimately prevailed. Today, Laura had defended dignity and equality not merely for herself and Emily, but for every passenger aboard. Her courage had sparked necessary change and accountability, reminding everyone aboard Skyline Airways Flight SL-105 of a fundamental truth: that true courage lies not in privilege or status, but in one's willingness to stand firmly, clearly, and resolutely against injustice, wherever it may arise. After Captain Mitchell returned to the cockpit, a powerful silence lingered throughout the cabin. Every passenger aboard Skyline Airways Flight SL-15 seemed fully aware they had just witnessed something deeply meaningful, a powerful affirmation of fairness and dignity. Amid this silence, all eyes naturally drifted toward Thomas Kensington, who sat visibly unsettled and embarrassed. He had quietly returned to his seat earlier, hoping to avoid further scrutiny, but now the collective gaze of the cabin rested firmly upon him. Passengers openly watched, waiting to see how the man responsible for instigating the injustice would respond to the captain's clear reprimand and the unmistakable support of the entire flight for Laura Bennett and her daughter. After a brief moment, Cynthia cautiously approached Kensington's seat. Her voice, now gentle but firm, clearly conveyed that the situation required his immediate action. "Mr. Kensington," Cynthia said quietly yet assertively, fully aware that nearby passengers were listening closely. "Given everything that has happened, we feel it would be appropriate if you offered a sincere apology to Mrs. Bennett and her daughter. I believe it would help bring closure to this unfortunate situation." Thomas Kensington stiffened noticeably, clearly uncomfortable with being publicly challenged in this manner. His face flushed slightly, embarrassment now combined with lingering pride and resentment. Yet, sensing he had little choice, he slowly stood, smoothing his suit jacket as he reluctantly stepped toward Laura and Emily. Laura, sensing his approach, turned slowly to face him, maintaining her composed, dignified stance. Emily instinctively clung tighter to her mother's arm, cautiously observing Kensington, her earlier anxiety resurfacing slightly. Clearing his throat awkwardly, Kensington spoke slowly and deliberately, his voice loud enough to be heard by all nearby passengers, though his discomfort was unmistakable. "Mrs. Bennett, I must offer you my sincere apologies for what happened today," he began, clearly struggling with each word. My actions and attitudes were inappropriate and unjustified. I deeply regret any pain or discomfort my behavior has caused you and your daughter. Please accept my apologies for this regrettable incident." The words hung heavily in the air, everyone fully understanding the depth of humility required for Kensington to publicly admit his wrongdoing. Though his voice and demeanor showed clear reluctance, his admission of fault in front of the entire cabin was an undeniable acknowledgement of justice finally prevailing. Laura calmly looked Kensington directly in the eyes, measuring the sincerity of his apology. Despite recognizing his clear discomfort, she chose grace over resentment, understanding that this moment was about teaching Emily, and indeed everyone aboard, a vital lesson about the power of forgiveness, balanced with accountability. "Mr. Kensington," Laura replied softly yet firmly, "I appreciate your apology and accept it. I hope today serves as a reminder to all of us that fairness and respect should always guide our interactions, regardless of who we are or what privileges we may have." Her words resonated profoundly, carrying the wisdom and dignity she had maintained throughout the ordeal. Kensington quietly nodded his acknowledgement, clearly humbled, before quickly returning to his seat without another word, deeply relieved to escape the continued scrutiny. At that precise moment, another voice suddenly broke the silence, one belonging to an older gentleman seated several rows behind Laura. He rose slowly to his feet, his voice gentle yet clear and confident enough to be heard throughout the cabin. "Mrs. Bennet is absolutely right," he declared firmly, looking around at fellow passengers, his eyes filled with a quiet conviction. "Today we've all witnessed something deeply troubling, but also incredibly powerful. Everyone, no matter who they are, deserves dignity, respect, and fairness. None of us should accept anything less." His statement immediately struck a chord with the passengers. Several more voices echoed his sentiment, joining him in open support. "She stood up for all of us today. No one deserves to be treated unfairly. She's absolutely right. Thank you, Mrs. Bennet, for your courage." As these voices united, the gentle applause that had begun earlier suddenly grew louder, more robust. Passengers across the cabin rose slowly to their feet, clapping strongly and sincerely, their applause echoing powerfully through the airplane. It became not merely appreciation, but a profound expression of gratitude for Laura's strength, dignity, and moral clarity. Laura stood quietly amid the rising applause, feeling deeply moved by this spontaneous show of support. Emily, sensing the powerful emotion around her, smiled warmly, her earlier fear replaced by a newfound pride in her mother and the incredible moment unfolding around them. "Mommy, they're clapping for you again," Emily whispered, eyes sparkling with wonder. Laura gently squeezed Emily's small hand, a warm smile spreading across her face. "They're clapping because we all stood up together, sweetheart. They're clapping because fairness and respect matter to everyone." Even Cynthia and Alyssa, now quietly watching from their stations, appeared visibly moved, understanding the significance of what had just occurred. Their faces clearly reflected a mixture of genuine remorse and appreciation for Laura's grace and the passengers' unified stand. As the applause gradually quieted, Captain Mitchell's voice returned briefly over the intercom, delivering a short yet powerful statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, understanding, and, most importantly, your commitment to ensuring fairness for all aboard today. We will now proceed with departure. I assure you once more, today's incident will remain an important lesson for us all at Skyline Airways. Thank you." Passengers slowly returned to their seats, settling back quietly as the cabin prepared for departure. Yet the mood on board had fundamentally shifted. Now clearly lighter, warmer, and filled with mutual respect. Conversations throughout the cabin remained gentle, yet passengers openly smiled and nodded approvingly to Laura as they caught her gaze, their eyes quietly expressing gratitude for the remarkable courage and moral clarity she had demonstrated. Laura returned their gestures warmly, deeply moved by the incredible unity and solidarity that had emerged aboard this flight. She felt profoundly grateful, understanding clearly that today had become much more than a personal stand. It was a powerful moment of collective affirmation, a shared recognition that fairness and dignity truly mattered to everyone. Emily, now relaxed and content, nestled comfortably against her mother, quietly reflecting upon the meaningful events she had witnessed. Laura softly whispered again to her daughter, a gentle yet powerful reminder of today's profound lesson. Emily, always remember this moment. No matter how difficult things become, standing up for what is right will always be worth it. Emily smiled warmly, hugging Fluffy tightly as the plane finally began moving toward the runway, ready to depart. She knew deeply, even at her young age, that today had profoundly shaped her understanding of fairness, courage, and dignity. Most importantly, she now understood clearly the incredible strength and importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. As the plane smoothly lifted into the sky, Laura gazed quietly out the window, feeling a profound sense of peace and pride. Today had begun as an ordinary flight, but had become something far more important. A moment where the strength of fairness had clearly triumphed, uniting everyone aboard in the shared realization that dignity, equality, and respect would always be worth defending. After a smooth, peaceful flight, Skyline Airways Flight SL-115 landed gently on the runway at Washington, D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, passengers began gathering their belongings, quietly sharing appreciative glances and warm smiles, acknowledging the profound significance of the journey they'd all experienced. Laura gently awakened Emily, who had drifted comfortably into sleep during the flight, the warmth and security of her mother's embrace soothing away earlier tensions. Emily opened her eyes slowly, immediately smiling as she realized they'd arrived safely. "Mommy, we're here," she exclaimed softly, stretching gently as she clutched Fluffy tightly once more. Laura smiled warmly, tenderly smoothing her daughter's soft hair. "Yes, sweetheart, we're home. It's been a long day, hasn't it?" Emily nodded thoughtfully, recalling the events of their memorable flight. "It was a little scary at first, Mommy," she admitted softly. "But then you made everything better. Everyone understood in the end." Laura smiled gently, deeply touched by Emily's innocent perception of the day's profound events. "They did, Emily, because standing up for fairness always matters." As passengers began slowly leaving their seats and exiting the plane, Laura calmly gathered their belongings, helping Emily adjust her small backpack as they prepared to disembark. The aisle gradually cleared, passengers nodding respectfully to Laura and offering warm smiles as they passed by. As Laura and Emily approached the aircraft's exit, they noticed Captain Mitchell standing there personally, clearly waiting to meet them before they stepped out into the terminal. His uniform was impeccable, his posture authoritative yet humble as he smiled warmly, gently extending his hand toward Laura. "Mrs. Bennet," Captain Mitchell said sincerely, his voice deeply respectful and genuine, "on behalf of Skyline Airways, please allow me to personally express our gratitude to you. Your remarkable courage today has reminded us of who we must always strive to be. Your stand for fairness and dignity has inspired not only our passengers, but all of us on board." Laura paused momentarily, deeply moved by Captain Mitchell's sincere gesture. She shook his hand warmly, maintaining eye contact as she responded, her voice gentle yet profoundly resolute. "Thank you, Captain Mitchell. It means a great deal to hear you say that. My only hope is that what happened today never repeats itself. No passenger, no matter who they are or where they come from, should ever have to face injustice or disrespect simply because someone else believes they're less important." Captain Mitchell nodded solemnly, clearly understanding and deeply appreciating Laura's thoughtful, powerful message. "I can assure you personally, Mrs. Bennet," he replied firmly, Today's events will lead to meaningful changes. You have my word." Emily looked up at the captain, her bright eyes wide with admiration. "Thank you for helping us today, Captain," she said shyly yet sincerely. Captain Mitchell knelt gently down, offering Emily a warm smile filled with genuine warmth and kindness. "You're very welcome, Emily. Your mom did something incredibly important today, and I'm very proud of you both." Emily smiled brightly, holding Fluffy tighter as she proudly took her mother's hand again, reassured and comforted by the captain's kindness. Just at that moment, something truly unexpected happened. Several passengers who had remained quietly standing near the exit began to gently applaud again. Their heartfelt applause gradually building into a powerful, collective gesture of sincere appreciation and solidarity. Laura, taken by surprise, looked around, deeply touched as passengers paused in the doorway, clapping warmly, their faces filled with genuine respect and gratitude. A young woman paused briefly, softly calling out with genuine emotion, "Thank you again, Mrs. Bennet. We'll always remember this." Another passenger, an elderly gentleman, added warmly, "You've shown us all something important today. Thank you for your bravery." The applause grew stronger, louder, echoing gently through the airplane's doorway, drawing the attention and smiles of other passengers in the terminal who paused curiously to watch. The moment, spontaneous and deeply moving, reflected the incredible unity and gratitude now shared by everyone who had witnessed Laura's courageous stand. Laura held Emily close, gently wiping away tears of profound emotion that had quietly formed in the corners of her eyes. Emily gazed around with innocent wonder, smiling happily as she whispered softly to her mother, "Mommy, they're all thanking you again. They really understand now." Laura gently squeezed Emily's small hand, her voice soft and emotional, yet deeply reassuring. "They're thanking us, sweetheart, because we stood strong together. Always remember this moment, Emily. When you're brave enough to stand for what's right, it inspires others to stand with you." Captain Mitchell, still standing close by, respectfully stepped back slightly, allowing the passenger's heartfelt gesture to continue uninterrupted. His eyes held a quiet pride, understanding clearly that today's incident, though initially difficult, had transformed into a profoundly valuable lesson and powerful moment for everyone aboard. Slowly, the applause gradually subsided as passengers exited the aircraft, gently smiling toward Laura and Emily as they departed. Laura stood quietly, emotionally touched, and deeply grateful for the incredible support and appreciation she'd received from everyone. Finally, as the last passengers departed, Captain Mitchell stepped closer once more, offering a final, sincere farewell. "I wish you both all the best," he said gently. "Please take care, and know you've left an important mark on us all today." Laura thanked him warmly, gently guiding Emily forward into the terminal. Walking slowly, hand in hand, mother and daughter moved quietly through the busy airport, hearts filled with peace, pride, and a profound sense of purpose. Emily, still clutching Fluffy tightly, smiled brightly, looking up at her mother again, her voice filled with joyful certainty. "Mommy, today I learned how important it is to always be brave, like you." Laura paused gently, kneeling to embrace Emily softly, whispering lovingly, "And today, you taught me that our strength comes from standing together, sweetheart." As they continued walking through the bustling terminal toward the exit, Laura felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and pride. Today had begun as just another journey, but had become something far more meaningful. An unforgettable lesson in courage, fairness, and dignity, not just for Laura and Emily, but for everyone aboard Flight SL-105. And as they stepped outside into the fresh, clear air of Washington, D.C., Laura knew deeply in her heart that their courage had mattered. They had taken a stand, faced injustice head-on, and ultimately transformed an uncomfortable incident into a powerful testament of unity, fairness, and respect. A moment they, and many others, would always remember. As the sun dipped lower over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the runway, the cabin of Skyline Airways Flight SL-105 filled with a gentle sense of calm and quiet reflection. Passengers settled peacefully into their seats, the earlier tensions replaced by a thoughtful, reassuring silence. Laura Bennett sat comfortably beside her daughter Emily, quietly observing her daughter's calm, thoughtful expression. Emily had grown notably quieter, lost deep in thought, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, Fluffy, tightly to her chest. Laura softly stroked her daughter's hair, feeling immense pride at the quiet strength Emily had shown throughout the events of the day. Emily looked up slowly, her eyes filled with a maturity that seemed remarkable for her young age. She studied her mother's face for a moment, clearly reflecting upon everything that had unfolded on their unforgettable journey. Then, with gentle sincerity and innocent wisdom, Emily leaned closer, softly whispering words that Laura would carry forever in her heart. "Mommy, today you taught me something really important," Emily said softly, her voice steady and clear, resonating deeply with quiet conviction. "No matter what happens, we must never bow our heads to injustice." Laura felt her heart swell with emotion, deeply moved by her daughter's simple yet profoundly powerful understanding. She wrapped her arms gently around Emily, holding her close, feeling the significance of the moment with every fiber of her being. "Yes, sweetheart," Laura whispered tenderly, her voice filled with gentle pride. "That's exactly right. Always remember that, no matter how difficult it may be. Standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's always the right thing to do." Emily smiled warmly, her expression filled with genuine trust and admiration for her mother. Together, they sat quietly, holding on to each other, letting the meaning of Emily's words sink deeply into their hearts. Around them, passengers continued quietly, reflecting on the powerful lesson they'd all learned together today. The shared experience aboard Flight SL-15 had become far more than a simple journey. It had become an unforgettable demonstration of courage, fairness, and unity in the face of injustice. The gentle hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as the plane began taxiing slowly toward the runway, signaling that their journey was finally about to begin anew. Laura leaned back into her seat, gazing thoughtfully out the window at the twilight sky slowly fading into the gentle hues of dusk. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, knowing today had made a difference, one that mattered deeply. Emily, still nestled comfortably against her mother, gently closed her eyes, drifting slowly towards sleep. Laura glanced down at her daughter, smiling softly, feeling deep gratitude and pride. As the plane's wheels lifted gracefully off the runway, rising steadily into the evening sky, Laura silently repeated Emily's words again in her heart, letting their profound meaning fill her completely. "No matter what happens, we must never bow our heads to injustice." She knew these words, spoken so innocently yet powerfully by Emily, had resonated with everyone aboard the flight. It was a lesson she hoped would stay with her daughter and everyone else forever. As the plane climbed smoothly into the peaceful evening sky, Laura gazed thoughtfully out at the lights of Washington, D.C. twinkling softly below. She understood clearly that while their journey today had begun with unexpected difficulty, it had ultimately led to something profoundly meaningful. It was a powerful reminder to everyone that courage, fairness, and dignity would always triumph when people stood strong together. Laura closed her eyes briefly, allowing a gentle smile of quiet satisfaction and pride to cross her lips, knowing deeply in her heart that the lessons learned today would not be forgotten. They would serve as a lasting reminder to Emily and indeed to everyone who had witnessed their remarkable stand, of the power each person possessed when they chose to confront injustice with unwavering strength and dignity. As the emotional scene gently fades, the voice of the narrator calmly and warmly addresses the audience directly, inviting reflection and action with a clear, meaningful message. What do you think about today's story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced an injustice similar to what Laura and Emily faced today? How did you respond? How did it make you feel? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences can inspire and encourage others to stand strong when faced with unfair treatment. The narrator's tone grows stronger and more passionate, delivering a clear call to action. If you believe in fairness, dignity, and equality for everyone, share this story widely to spread this positive message. By sharing, you help remind everyone that standing up against injustice isn't just the right thing to do, it's our shared responsibility. The screen slowly fades to black, leaving viewers with Emily's powerful words clearly displayed. No matter what happens, we must never bow our heads to injustice. This strong, memorable message remains clearly on screen, lingering long enough for viewers to fully absorb its profound impact, an inspiring conclusion that will resonate deeply, compelling them to reflect, engage, and share this powerful story far and wide.